The child stopped mid-step. Then he ran. No hesitation, no scanning, no confusion. Straight toward a woman he had never seen in his life. "Mama!" The sound cracked through O'Hare Airport. Heads turned instantly. A woman near the gate dropped her phone. A TSA officer took one step forward, then stopped, because the boy had already reached her. He wrapped both arms around her waist like he'd been terrified she would disappear before he got there. Sugni Mehra froze. She had never seen this child before in her life. But the boy wasn't acting like a stranger who had made a mistake. He was shaking with relief. Real relief. The kind that comes after waiting too long for something you were scared would never return. Sugni looked down at him slowly. "Who are you?" she asked softly. The little boy looked up at her with complete certainty. "Mama," he said again. Sugni did not move. Not because she was calm, because she did not understand what was happening to her body. Then he whispered, quietly enough that only she heard, loud enough that it changed everything. "You came back," he whispered. "She promised you would." Sugni got more confused. 3 questions formed in her mind. Come back from where? Who promised? And why does this child, who has never seen my face, hold me like he already knows me? She had no answers. She looked down. He looked up. His expression stopped her cold. Not confusion, not the wild-eyed panic of a child who had grabbed the wrong stranger and was about to realize it. Relief. The specific, bone-deep relief of someone who has been afraid for so long they had forgotten what the absence of fear felt like. The boy showed no intention of letting go. His name was Curly Osuji, 8 years old, Nigerian-American, Chicago-born. His father materialized from the crowd in 4 strides, close to 40, the kind of presence that occupies a room fully and deliberately. Jaw tight, shadows under his eyes that excellent tailoring couldn't conceal. "Curly." His voice was controlled, carefully so. "Come on, let go." Curly didn't let go. Sugni crouched down to eye level with the boy. Up close, his father's gravity was already in his face. Something watchful, composed, older than 8. She spoke without thinking. Not English, her grandmother's Hindi. Reflex and automatic. Sab theek ho jayega chota sa, daro mat. Everything will be all right, little one. Don't be afraid. Something moved across Curly's face. Not confusion. Recognition. "She told me you would come," he said quietly, before the snow stopped. Sugni looked at the terminal windows. Chicago's first snow was falling. Had been falling, perhaps 20 minutes. She had barely noticed it walking in. "Who told you?" she asked. He looked at his father, then back at her. Said nothing else. His father, Chuka Osuji, she would learn, cleared his throat. The polished exterior was present, but fractured like glass after impact. He apologized, explained in the clipped economy of a man not accustomed to explaining himself that Curly had stopped speaking in stages after his mother's death 2 years ago. That he didn't approach strangers. That he hadn't, in fact, approached anyone in longer than Chuka cared to calculate. "He doesn't approach anyone," Sugni said, and then caught herself because she had no idea why she had said it with such certainty. Chuka looked at Sugni. "You're right," he said quietly. "He doesn't." Curly finally loosened his grip, but he looked back twice as his father guided him toward the exit. The second time, just before they disappeared around the corner, he raised one small hand, almost a wave. That night, for the first time in months, Curly slept without nightmares. Chuka called the following morning. They met at a quiet cafe on the south side of the Chicago River, gray water moving slowly below the windows. He didn't ease into it. For 7 weeks before the airport, Curly had been drawing a woman he had never met. Same face every time. Indian features, dark hair worn loose, an expression simultaneously still and warm. Chuka had found the first one on Wednesday night, sitting in his too-quiet penthouse while Chicago blazed 40 floors below. He had asked Curly about it the next morning. "She comes in my dreams," Curly had said. "Mommy talks to me. She points at her. She says that she's coming." Chuka had asked a few people about the drawings. Carefully, quietly. Most of them only stared for a moment before looking away. Not in fear, in discomfort, the kind that tries to turn something strange into something explainable too quickly. But none of them could explain why the face in every drawing stayed exactly the same, or why Curly always drew her looking back at him like she already knew him. He simply ended the call. Then Curly drew the woman near her window, with snow falling behind her. Beside the sketch, in shaky handwriting, 5 words. "She misses her grandmother too." Chuka had stared at that line for a long time, because his son had never, not once, not from any source Chuka could identify, heard anything about this woman's grandmother. And at the bottom corner of the page, drawn with the careful seriousness of a child recording something important, a small silver ring, exactly like the one Sugni was wearing at the airport. Sitting across from her now, Chuka laid it on the table plainly. The offer, a temporary live-in position through winter break, her own wing, full autonomy. Not a nanny, he was precise about this. An emotional presence, something no specialist had managed to provide. Sugni looked at the river. She had crossed an ocean to be alone. A clean page, no attachments, no one else's grief to carry. Her fiancé of 9 years had married her cousin 3 weeks before their wedding, and she had spent 6 weeks in her New Delhi apartment deciding that staying was a slower kind of dying. Chicago was supposed to be the escape, but Curly's face kept returning. That expression at the airport, the exhausted relief of someone who had been waiting. She knew that expression. She had worn it herself. "I'll come," she said. The penthouse was breathtaking and completely, unmistakably silent. Not peaceful silent, the silence of a place where no one was comfortable making noise. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything accurate, everything immaculate. 2 photographs visible. Chuka at a corporate event, and Zita laughing at something outside the frame. Nothing a child had chosen. No shoes in the hall. No drawings on the refrigerator. Sugni was still unpacking when Curly appeared. He didn't look at her face first. He looked at the scarf folded beside her suitcase. Deep emerald green. He stared at it for a few silent seconds before speaking. "This used to be your favorite color." Sugni's hands stopped moving. A strange cold moved through her. Because it was. Not anymore, not for years, but when she was younger, before grief and betrayal and adulthood sanded pieces off her, she had worn emerald green constantly. Her grandfather used to call her little parrot. She had refused any other color for nearly 3 years. No one in Chicago knew that. No one outside India knew that. "What did you say?" she asked carefully. Curly blinked, genuinely puzzled by her reaction. "In the dream, you wore this color all the time." Silence settled between them. Not frightening, just impossible. Then Curly's attention drifted back to the open suitcase as though nothing unusual had happened. And somehow that made it stranger. Sugni set down what she was holding. She pulled a small cloth pouch from the bottom of her back. Cardamom pods, star anise, dried mango. She held out the cardamom. He leaned in with the seriousness of a scientist. Inhaled. Something softened in his face. Then his eyes shifted to her wrist. "You don't wear it anymore." "Wear what?" "The gold bracelet." He said it casually, thoughtfully. "Mommy said you stopped wearing it after it broke." The heir left the room. Because there was a bracelet, her grandmother's, thin gold with tiny blue stones, worn every single day until it snapped while visiting her grandfather in the hospital shortly before he died. After that, her grandmother never wore jewelry again. Sugni had not spoken about that bracelet in years. She wasn't sure she ever had. "Did I say something wrong?" Curly asked. Before she could answer, footsteps crossed the hallway. Chuka entered carrying a folder, completely unaware that the heir had changed. Sugni looked at this man, then at his son, and understood something clearly. She could not leave. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. She cooked in the mornings. Simple things. Cumin, turmeric, the sweet warmth of ghee filling a kitchen that had never held those smells. The first morning, Curly did not sit immediately. He stood at the kitchen doorway longer than usual, watching her move around the space. Then he said something that broke the pattern entirely. "You changed the light in this room." Sugni paused. "What do you mean?" Curly tilted his head as if checking something only he could see. "It was darker before you came." Then more quietly, "Before you came," Curly said quietly, "Daddy stopped opening the curtains." Sugni glanced instinctively toward the windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass, Chicago blazing beyond it. Beautiful, expensive, completely closed off. She looked back at Curly. "What do you mean?" Curly shrugged lightly. He said the apartment felt colder when the light got in. Silence. Sugni stopped what she was doing. Because she had not known that. She looked past him, toward the hallway almost instinctively, and for the first time she understood. Chuka was not just watching them. He was avoiding something. Curly appeared at the counter eventually, pulled like something magnetic, and she let him watch without commenting. Bedtime stories came next. Her grandmother's stories, slightly adapted. A boy who could talk to rivers, a father who built bridges across oceans. By the fourth night, Curly was asking for his second story. On the fifth night, Sugni sang. Just a few lines. An old Hindi folk song her grandfather used to hum during monsoon season. Curly went completely still beneath the blanket. "What?" she asked. Curly looked at her strangely after the song ended. "That's the song from the rain." Sugni went still. "What rain?" "The one in your dream." He frowned softly. "The old man was there again." Her pulse stumbled. "What old man?" she asked carefully. Curly looked confused now, confused by her confusion. "The one who always stands beside you when you're sad." Sugni turned slowly toward the darkened window. Because her grandfather used to sing that exact melody during monsoon storms. The breath left her body. "How do you know about my grandfather?" He frowned, genuinely confused. "You were crying in the dream." She turned slowly toward the dark window. Because she had stopped singing after her grandfather died. Completely, without announcement, without explanation. And no one, not even Anika, her closest friend, knew that was the reason. Curly had never been to India, had never heard her grandfather's name, had never, as far as any logic could account for, been anywhere near this information. She stayed very still until she trusted herself to move again. That night, Sugni could not sleep. Chicago glowed beyond the windows in cold blue light. She sat alone on the guest bed with Curly's drawings spread around her. The same face. Again and again. Her face. One drawing showed the silver ring. Another showed snow outside a window before the storm had arrived. Another had only 5 shaky words written beneath it. She misses her grandmother too. Sugni stared at that sentence until her chest hurt. Because grief was one thing, but this felt like recognition. Somewhere down the hallway, she heard movement. Chuka, awake again. Neither of them slept much anymore. The next morning, she found him standing alone at the kitchen windows before sunrise, city lights reflecting faintly across the glass. He spoke without turning around. "He started drawing you before the snow came." Sugni said nothing. Chuka finally looked at her. "I checked everything," Chuka said quietly. "There's no source for what he's saying. And yet, he says it anyway. And yet, he does." Neither of them spoke after that, because for the first time, both of them were standing in front of something neither logic nor grief could fully explain. Chuka watched all of it from doorways, from the kitchen island, from the edges of rooms. She could feel his attention even when she couldn't see him. Careful, precise, the focus of someone encountering something they don't have language for yet. Once she caught him in the living room doorway while she sat on the floor beside Curly, both of them bent over a drawing. He straightened when she looked up. His expression, in the half-second before he composed it, looked like a man who hadn't realized how cold a room had gotten until someone turned on the heat. One night, something changed. Curly woke crying, but not loudly, not fear, something else. Sugni reached his room first, but before she could speak, Chuka was already there, standing in the doorway. He did not enter immediately. Then Curly said something half asleep. "Don't send her away again." Chuka froze. A full silence settled over the room. Sugni noticed it immediately. This was not about her. This was older. Chuka spoke carefully. "No one is sending anyone away." But Curly shook his head slightly in sleep. "She came before. You always send her away after she sings." Sugni's breath stopped. Chuka looked at her. For the first time, his control slipped. Not anger, but confusion threaded with something closer to fear. Because Curly was not talking about her. He was talking about something that had happened before she arrived. The clashes between Sugni and Chuka were quiet. That almost made them worse. He left schedules on the kitchen counter. Bedtimes, dietary guidelines, screen time limits. She adjusted them. Curly's bedtime shifted back 45 minutes because that was when he talked most. The spice restriction disappeared. 2 days later, Curly ate an entire bowl of dal for the first time in months. "You think I'm too controlled," Chuka said one Wednesday evening across the kitchen island. She considered it. "I think control is the only tool you picked up after Zita died, and now it's the only one you have." The silence that followed was the loudest thing the apartment had produced since she arrived. "Most of the people who work for me don't speak that way," he said. "I know," she said, and nothing more. He went back to his office. Past midnight, she came out for water and found him sitting at the kitchen island in complete darkness. Not working, not on his phone, just sitting. She put the kettle on, he didn't object. She brought tea without asking, he accepted without comment. After a while, Chuka said quietly, "I know how to solve problems. Business problems, structural problems, things with logic." He looked down at the untouched tea. "But I don't know how to help my son." Sugni leaned back slightly. "You keep trying to fix his grief, but grief isn't something you repair. You stay beside it until it softens." Chuka looked at her for a long moment. "And if I don't know how?" "Then learn," she said softly. "He's still waiting for you to." 2 mornings later, Sugni walked into the kitchen and stopped. Curly was standing on a chair beside the counter with absolute concentration on his face. Chuka sat at the island scrolling through emails, halfway through his coffee. "What are you two doing?" Sugni asked. Curly looked up too quickly. "Nothing?" She glanced at Chuka's coffee. Tiny green cardamom seeds floated near the surface. "Oh no," she said. Chuka frowned slightly before taking another sip, then another. He paused, looked slowly down into the cup. Curly's shoulders started shaking. "What did you put in this?" Chuka said carefully. Curly lost the battle completely. A real laugh burst out of him, sharp, bright, uncontrollable. Sugni froze. Because she understood instantly, it was the first full laugh she had ever heard from him. "Sugni says cardamom makes everything better," Curly announced proudly. Chuka stared at the coffee like a man personally betrayed by spices, then, against all dignity, took another sip. Curly laughed harder. Chuka looked between both of them, deeply outnumbered, and sighed. "I see. I'm being bullied in my own home." That only made Curly collapse further. And for the first time in a very long time, the apartment sounded like a place where happiness still knew the address. The snow came in force 2 days later. Real Chicago winter. Thick, committed, city silencing. Curly fell asleep during a movie at 9:30. Chuka carried him to bed and came back to find Sugni on the balcony, face tilted up, snow falling around her. He got his coat. He went out. They stood side by side without speaking. The city muffled beneath the storm, the sky that deep orange of winter holding over buildings. "I almost didn't get on the plane," she said. "From Delhi?" "I sat in the departure lounge for 45 minutes after boarding opened, boarding pass in my hand. I thought, what is there to go toward?" "What changed your mind?" "The window seat. I'd paid extra for it. And the idea that no one on the plane would know anything about me." He looked at her profile. She didn't look back. "I'm glad you didn't miss it," he said. Simple, quiet. But she heard everything behind those words. Curly before and Curly now. 2 years of sleepless nights. Everything the apartment had been before she arrived. She looked at him then. He was already looking at her. The snow fell between them. The space between them was very small. She was aware of it specifically, in the way you only notice a distance when you are thinking about crossing it. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. Below, Chicago glowed gold and silver against the winter dark. Then Chuka said quietly, "I forgot this apartment could sound alive. Not noise, not conversation. Life. Warmth in the kitchen, footsteps in the hall, Curly laughing, someone awake when another person came home." Sugni felt her chest tighten. The silence between them felt heavier than the snow falling outside. "We should go inside," she said quietly. "Yes," he answered. Neither of them moved for another full minute. 3 weeks later, a package arrived from India. No return name, her grandmother's handwriting on the label, familiar in the way of things known so long you stop consciously recognizing them. Inside, wrapped in old cotton, a photograph. Black and white, slightly faded. 2 women standing outside a hospital in Lagos. One was her grandmother. She would know that jaw, those shoulders, anywhere. The other woman was younger. Wide, warm smile, braids over one shoulder, that open, irresistible smile. She walked slowly to the living room, held the photograph beside the framed picture of Zita on the shelf. Zita, laughing, braids over one shoulder, that open, irresistible smile. She looked between them for a long time. Then, she turned the photograph over. Faded writing on the back. Blue ink, aged at the edges. For Zita, so our children never feel alone in the world. The apartment went completely silent around her. Slowly, slowly, everything rearranged itself. The drummings, the airport, the Hindi phrase Curly recognized in his body before his mind could explain it. Zita and the dreams, standing in darkness, pointing towards Sugni again and again. not random, not something the mind could explain away so easily. Something older than explanation. Something that had been waiting longer than any of them had lived. Her hands were not entirely steady when she unfolded the handwritten note beneath the photograph. One sentence, her grandmother's careful script. Some people are sent into our lives twice. Once through those who came before us, and once again when we need them most. Down the hallway, Curly laughed softly at something only he understood. Chicago moved beyond the windows in rivers of gold and winter blue. Sugni stood holding the photograph that had crossed decades and an ocean to reach her hands. And for the first time, the question didn't feel like something she was thinking. It felt like something being placed inside her. How long had this been arranged? And who had been weaving us into each other's lives all this time? If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the Story Vault for more unforgettable stories.